Hi, and welcome back to the Fundamentals of Fitness. I'm Alison, and if you're new here, this podcast is about cutting through the noise around training, nutrition, and health, and focusing on what actually works in real life. No extremes, no guilt, no unrealistic expectations. Today's episode is about something that sounds sensible on the surface, but quietly derails a lot of people who are actually doing quite well. Why doing more often makes results worse. And I want to be really clear straight away. This is not an episode about effort. It's not about laziness, it's not about discipline, and it's definitely not about wanting it badly enough. In fact, this tends to show up in people who are already committed, people who care, people who show up consistently. And when progress slows, and it always does at some point, the most natural reaction is to add more sessions, more intensity, more structure, more rules. It feels logical, it feels responsible, it feels like the opposite of giving up. But for many people, this is the exact moment where things start to feel harder, not better. Energy drops, training feels heavier, and results stall further. And that can be confusing because on paper, you're doing everything right. So this episode, we're going to slow this right down, and we're going to talk about why your body doesn't respond to effort in isolation, how capacity and recovery actually drive your progress, and why doing more can sometimes be the thing holding you back. This isn't about doing less for the sake of it. It's about understanding when more stops being helpful and what to look at instead. So pop on those trainers or grab that cuppa and let's get right into it. So let's start somewhere familiar. At some point in almost every fitness journey, something changes. Not necessarily dramatically, and not in a way that immediately sets alarm bells off. Just quietly. The progress that once felt obvious starts to soften. The wins feel smaller. The feedback isn't as clear. And when that happens, the most common instinct is incredibly human. You think, I need to do more. Not because you're impatient, and not because you're lazy, and not because you're chasing extremes, but because historically, effort has worked. When you first start training more consistently, things improved. When you cleaned up your food a bit, results followed. And when you showed up more often, you felt better. So when progress slows, your brain reaches for the most familiar lever. More sessions, more intensity, more steps, more structure, more rules. It feels responsible, it feels committed, and it feels like the opposite of giving up. And this is important to say clearly. People don't usually do more because they don't care. They do more because they care a lot. I see this pattern constantly with clients who are actually doing very well. They're training 3 times a week. They've been consistent for months. They've built routines that fit around work, family, and real life. Nothing dramatic is going wrong. But the scale isn't moving as quickly. Strength gains aren't as obvious week to week. Body composition changes feel slower. And instead of stepping back, they step in. They add a 4th session. They throw in extra cardio just to be safe. They tighten food rules slightly and they remove flexibility. It doesn't feel extreme. It feels sensible. But within a few weeks, something shifts. Sessions feel heavier. Recovery feels slower. Motivation dips. Small aches appear. Energy drops in subtle ways. And now there's confusion, because effort went up, but results didn't. Sometimes they actually went backwards. This is in the moment where people often start questioning themselves. Maybe I'm not cut out for this. Maybe I need to be stricter. Maybe I'm not just disciplined enough. And this is where I want to slow things down right now, because what's happening here is not a personal flaw. It's a misunderstanding of how progress actually works once you're no longer at the very beginning. At the start of a fitness journey, the relationship between effort and reward is very direct. You go from doing very little to doing something. Your body responds quickly, strength improves, fitness improves, energy improves, and your confidence comes along with it. That early phase trains your brain to believe that more input equals more output. And for a while, that's true. But the relationship does not scale infinitely. There is a point, and everyone reaches it eventually, where the limiting factor is no longer effort. It's capacity. Your body can only adapt to what it can recover from. And recovery isn't just about rest days or sleep. It's about the total load your system is carrying. Training is a stressor. So is dieting. So is work pressure. So is emotional load. So is poor sleep. So is life being busy and unpredictable. When progress slows and you add more, you're not just adding exercise. You're adding extra stress to a system that may already be near its limit. And here's the part that often surprises people. The body doesn't respond to stress by collapsing. It responds by becoming protective. It pulls back output, it slows adaptation, and it conserves energy. From the outside, that looks like plateau. But from the inside, it feels like everything is harder. Nothing is clicking. You're working harder for less return. That doesn't mean the plan is wrong, and it definitely doesn't mean you are wrong. It means the system is asking for something different. I see this a lot with clients who are quietly consistent, not dramatic, and not extreme. They're the ones who train 3 times a week, walk regularly, eat mostly well, miss sessions occasionally, but they don't spiral, and they're balancing work, family, and commitments. Their progress is steady, until it isn't. Nothing breaks and nothing goes wrong, but results slow. And their instinct is rarely to stop. Instead, they say things like, I'll add an extra session for a few weeks. I'll just tighten things up until it shifts. Or I probably haven't been pushing hard enough. And again, this doesn't come with punishment or shame. It comes from responsibility. But a few weeks later, they report feeling more tired, dreading sessions slightly, losing enthusiasm and feeling frustrated rather than motivated. The plan hasn't failed. What's happened is that the stress recovery balance has tipped. This is where a performance lens helps, not to intimidate, but just to clarify. Athletes don't judge progress week to week. They judge it over blocks, sessions, and years. If a swimmer has a flat few weeks, they don't immediately double their volume. If a tennis player feels heavy, they don't just add extra hours on court. And if a motorsport driver's performance dips, the response isn't drive harder every day. The response is assessment. They look at load distribution, recovery quality, cognitive fatigue, external stress, and phase of the season. Athletes understand something everyday trainees often don't get taught. More work is only useful if the system can adapt to it. And adaptation depends on recovery. When capacity is maxed out, adding more doesn't create progress. It creates noise. So what does this mean for you already? And if you're listening to this and recognizing yourself, pause for a moment. Ask yourself honestly and without judgment, have I added more because progress slowed? Did I check my recovery first? Did I assume effort was the missing piece? If the answer is yes, that doesn't mean you've messed up. It means you've reached a more advanced stage of progress. Beginners get rewarded for doing more. Intermediate trainees get rewarded for doing enough, consistently, and recovering properly. This episode isn't about telling you to do less. It's about helping you understand why more isn't always better and what to look at instead. Because once you've understood this shift, fitness stops feeling like a constant battle, and that's where long-term progress actually lives. So let's take a step back now and look at what's really going on when doing more stops working. Because from the outside, it often looks like a motivation problem or a discipline problem or a willpower issue. But underneath all of that, it's a physiology and capacity issue. Your body doesn't respond to effort in isolation. It responds to stress, and then it responds to how well that stress is recovered from. That distinction matters more than most people realize. Stress is not the enemy, but it is cumulative. Training is a stressor. That doesn't mean it's bad. Stress is how the body adapts. You apply stress through training. The body responds by rebuilding itself stronger, fitter, or more efficient. But that process only works if the stress is within your capacity to recover from. And here's the part that often gets missed. Your body doesn't care where the stress comes from. It doesn't separate training stress, work stress, emotional stress, sleep disruption, time pressure. It all goes in the same system. So when you add more training during a busy period of life, you're not just adding another workout, you're adding stress to a system that may already be close to its limit. And when that happens, the body doesn't fail dramatically, it adapts defensively. So what does defensive adaptation look like? When recovery can't keep up with the stress, the body's priority shifts. It moves away from growth and towards protection. That can show up as slower strength gains, reduced fat loss, increased fatigue, poorer sleep, lower motivation, more aches and pains, and feeling flat in sessions. None of this means you're broken. It means your system is trying to maintain balance. Think of it less like a machine breaking down and more like a thermostat turning things down to prevent overload. From the outside, this gets labelled as I've hit a plateau. But physiologically, it's often I'm asking for more than I can currently adapt to. That's a very different story. Recovery is not just rest days. And when people hear recovery, they often picture rest days, stretching, foam rolling, maybe sleep. Those things matter, but recovery is bigger than that. Recovery is the body's ability to repair tissue, restore energy, regulate hormones, and stabilize the nervous system. And recovery capacity is finite. You don't get unlimited recovery just because you're motivated. You don't get extra recovery points for wanting results more. Recovery depends on your sleep quality, your nutrition availability, your stress load, your consistency, not chaos, and time. When you increase training frequency or intensity without increasing recovery capacity, you create a mismatch. And that mismatch is where results start to stall. I see this with people who are doing all the right things. They're not extreme, they're not reckless. They're training 3 times a week, walking regularly, eating sensibly, and then progress slows down, so they add an extra HIIT session or more steps or tighter food rules. But what doesn't change? Sleep stays the same, work stress stays high, life stays busy. A few weeks later, they say, I feel more tired than before. My workouts feel harder. I don't feel like I'm recovering. That's not a mystery. They've increased their stress without increasing their recovery. The system responds by slowing adaptation. See, athletes are a useful reference point here, not because they're better people, but because their systems have to work. In high-performance sport, load management is not optional. In endurance sports like rowing or swimming, volume is planned carefully across the seasons. Athletes don't just add more training because performance dips. They look at the accumulated fatigue, nervous system load, quality of output, and recovery markers. In motorsport, for example, drivers aren't just physically loaded, they're cognitively loaded. Reaction time, focus, decision-making, all of that is stress. If performance drops, the solution is rarely more laps. It's often better recovery, adjusted workload, refined execution. Athletes understand that output is limited by recovery, not by desire. Everyday trainees often haven't been taught this. They've only been taught, try harder. That works, until it doesn't. One of the reasons doing more backfires is the nervous system. You don't need to know anatomy to understand this, just the concept. Training doesn't just stress muscles, it stresses the nervous system that controls them. When nervous system load is high, the strength output drops and your coordination suffers and the perceived effort increases. So workouts feel harder, even if nothing has changed on paper. That's why someone can be training more, eating less, trying harder, and still feel like everything is heavy and slow. It's not a lack of grit, it's accumulated fatigue. This is especially relevant for people chasing fat loss. When stress stays high for too long, energy expenditure can down-regulate, hunger signals become much louder, and recovery becomes poorer. So paradoxically, doing more, eating less, pushing harder, can result in stalled fat loss, increased cravings, and poorer adherence. Again, not failure, just physiology doing its job. So what does this mean for you right now? If progress slows and your instinct was to add more, pause. Ask yourself, what stress am I already carrying? Has recovery improved alongside effort? Am I trying to force progress instead of supporting it? This isn't about doing less forever. It's about recognizing when the system needs support and not pressure. Because once recovery and capacity are respected, progress often resumes without adding anything new. So up to this point, we've talked about why doing more often backfires. Now we need to talk about what to do instead. Because if you take one thing away from this episode, it's this. The solution to stalled progress is rarely more effort. It's better interpretation. And this is where a lot of people get stuck because they understand the theory, but they don't know how to apply it in real life. So let's slow this right down and make it practical for you. First, change the questions you ask. When progress slows, most people ask, what should I add? Another session, another rule, another lever. A more useful question is, what is my body responding to right now? That small shift changes everything because instead of reacting emotionally, you start responding intelligently. Step 1, hold the plan longer than feels comfortable. This sounds almost too simple, but it's one of the biggest breakthroughs people can make. Most plans don't fail because they're ineffective, they fail because they're not held long enough. If you're training consistently and following the plan most of the time, not wildly inconsistent, then a few slow weeks do not mean the plan has stopped working. Athletes understand this instinctively. They don't judge a training block based on one heavy session, one bad week, or one flat performance. They look at trends over time. For everyday trainees, this means resisting the urge to change everything at the first sign of slowdown, holding structure steady while life fluctuates, and allowing adaptation time to actually happen. Progress often resumes simply because the nervous system settles and recovery improves, not because you've added anything. I see this quite regularly with clients who think they need more. They'll say to me, I feel like I should be doing more. I'm worried I'm not doing enough. But when we actually look at their week, their sessions are consistent, their effort is solid, and recovery is borderline. Instead of adding anything, we hold. Same sessions, same structure, same expectations. 2 or 3 weeks later, the energy improves, lifts feel smoother, and progress nudges forward. Nothing new was added. The system just had time to respond. And that's not laziness, that's patience, which is a skill. Step 2, improve quality before increasing your quantity. If progress slows down, quantity is usually the last thing to adjust. Quality will always come first. Ask yourself, am I rushing the sessions? Am I distracted? Am I going through the motions? Am I actually executing the plan as intended? You don't need more workouts if the ones you're doing aren't fully expressed. Athletes don't add volume to fix poor execution. A golfer doesn't hit more balls if their swing is off. They slow down. A swimmer doesn't just add lengths, they refine their technique. And a motorsport driver doesn't just push harder, they improve lines and consistency. For you, this might mean slowing reps down, resting properly between sets, focusing on intent rather than fatigue, and training with attention rather than autopilot. Often, better quality alone restores the progress. Step 3, audit recovery like it matters, because it does. This is where most people realize they've been underestimating their recovery. Recovery isn't optional. It's not a reward. It's part of the process. Instead of asking, did I work hard enough? Try asking, am I sleeping enough? Am I eating enough to support this training? Am I mentally fried? Is life unusually demanding right now? Athletes track recovery markers obsessively, not because they're fragile, but because performance depends on it. You don't need fancy tools to do this. Simple checks work. How do I feel waking up? Do I feel flat or alert at sessions? Is soreness lingering longer than usual? Am I irritable, foggy, or unmotivated? If these signals are flashing, the answer is rarely more. Step 4. Accept that enough is a moving target. One of the hardest lessons in long-term fitness is this. What worked before may not be appropriate now. And that's not regression, it's progression. At different stages of life, your capacity changes, your work changes, stress changes, sleep changes, responsibilities change. Athletes expect this too. Their training load varies across off-season, pre-season, competition, recovery phase. Everyday trainees often try to hold the same expectations year-round, and that's how burnout happens. Sometimes enough is 3 good sessions a week, steady food intake, walking and moving. And that is productive, even if it doesn't feel dramatic. Step 5, know when not to change anything. This might be the most important practical takeaway of all. There are phases where the best move is to stay put. No additions, no restrictions, no overhauls. Just consistency, execution, and patience. This is incredibly uncomfortable for people who care. It can feel like standing still, but often this is where adaptation actually catches up. Athletes call this consolidation. Everyday trainees rarely hear about it, but they live it. Let's be very clear here. Doing more isn't bad. Increasing volume or intensity isn't wrong. It just has to be earned, supported, timed correctly. Athletes add more when recovery capacity increases, life stress is manageable, and the system is stable. They don't add more because they feel behind. That's the difference. So what this means for you right now, and if you're feeling stuck, here's a grounded way forward. Hold your current plan for another few weeks. Focus on quality and execution. Prioritize your sleep and food consistency. Notice how you feel, not just what you see, and resist reactive changes. Progress doesn't need to be forced, it needs to be supported. And often the most productive thing you can do is stop interfering. Before we finish this episode, I want to zoom out, because if you've recognised yourself in what we've talked about so far, if you've realised that doing more may actually be holding you back, there's a risk that your brain jumps to a new kind of pressure, a different little voice, one that says, "So I've been doing it wrong. I should have known better. I've wasted time." And that voice isn't helpful either. So let's put this phase into proper perspective. This is not a sign you're failing. Reaching a point where doing more stops working is not a warning sign. It's not a red flag. It's not a dead end. It's actually a marker that you've moved out of the beginner phase. Beginners get rewarded for almost anything. Consistency alone produces results. But once you've been training for a while, once your body has adapted, progress becomes quieter, slower, more subtle, more dependent on recovery and timing. That's not regression, that's maturity in the process. And as most people are never taught what this stage looks like, they misinterpret it as something going wrong. So why does this phase feel so uncomfortable? And it's uncomfortable because it removes urgency as a driver. You can't just panic your way through it, force it with discipline, or override it with effort. You have to trust the process. And trust is harder than pushing. Pushing feels active. Holding steady feels passive, even when it isn't. But adaptation doesn't respond to anxiety, it responds to consistency. This is something I see again and again with real people, not athletes, not influencers, people who care deeply, show up consistently, and are doing enough. They hit this phase and say things like, "I feel like I should be doing more. I'm worried I'm wasting my time. I don't want to slip backwards." And underneath all of that is fear. Fear of losing momentum, falling behind, and undoing the progress. But here's the reframe that really matters. You don't lose progress by holding steady. You lose progress by burning out. Staying engaged calmly is far more powerful than cycling between extremes. Athletes expect this phase. They plan for it. They know there will be periods where progress plateaus, effort feels high, and input doesn't immediately reflect it. They don't label those periods as failure, they label them as consolidation, accumulation, and groundwork. In endurance sports, these phases are deliberately boring. In motorsport, this might look like refining consistency, improving recovery routines, and holding performance steady under load. No one panics because there's nothing dramatic happening. They understand that stability precedes progression. Everyday trainees rarely hear that message. Progress isn't linear, but it is directional. One of the most damaging myths in fitness is that progress should always be obvious, visible, measurable week to week, externally validating. And in reality, progress is often happening quietly. Your tolerance can improve, your habits stabilize, recovery improves, and confidence grows. These don't always show up on the scale, but they matter because they determine whether you're still here 6 months from now. If you're calmer, more consistent, and less reactive, you are moving forwards, even if nothing dramatic is happening on the surface. Urgency can be your enemy here. Urgency is what pushes people to add unnecessary sessions, restrict harder than needed, and abandon plans prematurely. Urgency tells you that something needs fixing now, but often nothing is broken. The system just needs time. And this is where a lot of long-term success is decided. People who learn to sit in this phase build durable habits, avoid burnout, and progress steady over years. People who can't tolerate it bounce between extremes, restart repeatedly, and never let adaptation catch up. Neither group works harder. One group just understands the timeline better. So what does staying the course actually look like? Staying the course doesn't mean doing nothing. It means showing up consistently, executing well, recovering intentionally, and resisting emotional changes. It means trusting that the plan doesn't need constant interference. Your body isn't lagging, it's adapting, and progress doesn't need to feel urgent to be real. This is where fitness stops being a battle and starts becoming sustainable. I want to leave you with this thought. If doing more made results worse, it doesn't mean you've tried too hard. It means you've reached the edge of your current capacity, and that's information and not judgment. And once you respect capacity, progress becomes calmer, steadier, and far more reliable. So what does this mean for you? If you're in this phase right now, you're not behind, you're not failing, and you're not doing it wrong. You're learning how your body actually works. And that knowledge, once you have it, can change everything. So before we finish today, I want you to pause for a moment and reflect, not on what you can see on the scale or in the mirror, but on how you're actually showing up. How does training feel right now? How does your energy feel across the week? How does your relationship with the process feel? If things feel calmer, if you're staying consistent without constantly changing your plans, if you're no longer reacting emotionally to every slow week, these are not small things. They're signs that you're learning how progress really works. This phase doesn't need forcing, it doesn't need tightening, and it doesn't need urgency. It needs patience, understanding, and consistency, the kind that lasts. Progress doesn't have to feel dramatic to be meaningful, and it doesn't need to feel exhausting to be effective. If this episode has helped you make sense of where you are right now, consider sharing it with someone who might be stuck in that do more loop without realizing it. And if you're finding this podcast useful, subscribing, rating, or reviewing really does help it reach the people who need this message the most. Thank you for trusting me with your time here today, and thank you for listening, and I'll see you in the next episode.